what I really hope for this session is that Thomas will be able to inspire us a bit about, how we can, I think we talked about, empower individuals to make changes to benefit not only the planet but society as a whole. Obviously we've had COP26, so there's been a real climate focus, but I think from what Thomas will talk to us about has absolute applications across society and planet. And Thomas and I had a chat a while ago about this session, and I think one of the things we were both really keen on is making sure it's really action orientated, because a lot of Thomas talks about is getting that from intent to action, which again I think as we appreciate the scale of change we've got to do, we can't just do the blah 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 as Greta's been talking about. We've got to move to action. So Thomas, I've got his book here, and I'm delighted to do the Paul waving the book around. I've not got quite so many post-it notes in it. I have got lots of scribblings in it, but I don't have the Paul post-it notes, which is something I need to do. So Thomas is going to help talk us. Oh, Michelle's got hers too. Snap, book,
wow.
Or Sudoku.
And I don't even have one.
Thomas doesn't even have his.
I don't even have one.
So Thomas will talk us a bit through how his thinking's evolved, where the principles behind the hero trap, and where his journey's been on that, thinking about how we can empower individuals to make a change. And I think one of the reasons I was really excited about this evening is it's something we often talk about on MarketingKind events, is that conundrum between being marketeers. Are we driving consumerism, which is not sustainable, on one hand, and then on the other hand, we are experts in inspiring behavioural change. So on the other hand, we've got this huge opportunity to really make a difference. So that's what I'm really looking forward to sort of exploring a bit with Thomas. So I think you probably all have seen and heard of who Thomas is, but a very well-known marketing and sustainability champion and driver of different thought, and I think that's definitely what we'll hear here today. And actually the first book that Thomas wrote was, interestingly, I think you said it was inspired when COP was in Copenhagen. So back in 2009 when COP15 was going on, that led to Thomas's Goodvertising movement about how to make advertising a real force for good. So the fact that hero traps come out at the year of COP26 is probably quite an interesting either coincidence or maybe that's driven, and we'll see what comes out in the next few COPs. Although as they're every year, Thomas, now you might, if they're coming together a bit more often, you might need to write a bit more quickly. So just Thomas, just starting off with, I think it'd be really useful and interesting for everyone to hear how your thoughts have evolved, and how your thoughts have evolved. I think one of the things you talk about in the hero trap is challenging what is now a sort of accepted norm of the importance of corporate purpose. And I watched your keynote speech when you launched the book, and I think you referred to purpose as a bit like peeing in a wetsuit, whereas it may feel good at the beginning, but it starts to stink quite quickly. Sorry to blow the tone. For you, why is corporate purpose starting to stink?
Yeah, I think you in a way summarized it really well, the journey from sort of like a decade ago with the first book, and where in fact Paul and Anna and I met each other for the first time doing an event in London for sustainable brands. And at that time I was 30, beginning of my 30s, and just frustrated advertising creative who felt that what could I in fact do. And I think this was where we connected with, at that time, Pimp My Cause, and this belief that obviously if you're working in this industry, there's some things you could work for, and our industry have a tremendous responsibility in dealing with some of these things, but also in terms of shaping brands and what brands could do and stuff. And back then I really had this belief that, wait a moment, there's something really interesting. There's an intersection between doing business and actually giving back to community in whatever ways it could be. And it might sound surprising today, but back then there wasn't actually there was not a lot of cases. It was difficult to find. Unilever just started their sustainable living plan. I think they had an anniversary last year, right? So it was more or less at the same time I wrote the book that came out. But so about 3 years ago, so I think actually the first, which might also be good to talk about, the first 5 years or so, I actually really felt that the marketing industry didn't give a fuck about it, just to be honest. They really didn't care. it wasn't part of the global conversation. The award shows didn't really want it to be part of anything, and so I think at that point I felt a little bit ignored. But the community who really embraced those thoughts were the sustainability people, and so I'm so happy about that, because that at least gave me a lot of insights from working with chief sustainability officers and others. But 3 years ago, I think the thing that sparked the second book was, and everyone do chip in at any point, but was that I do, and I'll actually recommend this for everyone who doesn't do this currently, but every year I go away all by myself, and I for a couple of days, and I reflect on sort of where the business is heading, my private life, and all that stuff, and I actually realized how difficult it was to create change in my own life. and so that sort of provoked me in a way to say, hey, wait a moment, if I can't, do this and that, and I'm not successful in this and that, maybe I'm looking at this change game the wrong way, because maybe it's not about, the sort of brand that needed to do the change. Maybe it's about me. And one of the analogies I share in the book is, in fact, that for those of you who try to quit smoking, is that, your doctors can tell you, your loved ones can tell you, your children can tell you, that, you can look at the packaging, it can try and scare you with those nasty damn images. And by the end of the day, the only one who are able to create that change is, in fact, ourselves. And so I really wanted to change that. And this time, I'm not actually sure that I at that point knew that I would write a book, because what I started doing was, in fact, I started looking at methodologies to try and build leadership in a different way. And I looked to coaching and psychotherapy, because those disciplines were quite, or are very, very goal-oriented. And so it was so interesting to talk with psychologists and psychotherapists and try and learn from that field. And one of the models that stuck with me was, in fact, a model that some of you might know, who's, been going to coaches or whatever, which was a model that was called I want, I can, I will. Really, really simple model. So there's something you want. Maybe you want to, smoke less or drink less or whatever. Then your capacity building with the I can, and then the I will is sort of that little moment of confidence where you actually go about doing it. And that inspired me to create the model that's in the book. And we started working early on with one of the first clients we actually worked with on this was IKEA, in fact. And the arrow ended up being asking 4 questions, which is, the first one is, what is it that you do? So the product or service, how unique in delivering that service or product, who can you help people become? And lastly, when do you enable that change? So I was kind of mirroring those two kind of models, and it was just so fascinating for me to see the result change. And so that kind of provoked me to write a book about it. In fact, that was just like, and now I didn't answer the question at all. Yes, purpose, damn it. No. So the reason, damn it, sorry about that. Yes, what then happened was obviously purpose being niche, so now everybody seems to be talking about purpose. A soft drink company, like everybody wants a purpose, like it's some sort of thing that you just pick down from the shelves. I sometimes say it's a bit like Pokemon, everybody's searching for it, but nobody really knows why. And so when you suddenly have so many companies coming into the purpose space, and some quite ridiculous ones as well, I mean, to be honest, then I felt that it suddenly became too good to be true. When you suddenly went down in the supermarket and every brand was pretending to be Mother Teresa, Gandhi, and so the authenticity had gone. Mm-hmm. I think the sort of who to trust. I mean, when purpose is suddenly sort of diluted, it's sort of like what long-tasting chewing gum was in the 90s. It's just like purpose is just on everything. So then I felt maybe we're actually approaching a post-purpose market, where you're not buying the values, the why, but you're actually buying who you can help people become. So back to the who from the arrow, Because for me, the real proof of a purposeful company and great leadership is, in fact, if they've helped me become more healthy, conscious, greener, less biased, whatever it might be. So that was the thing so that's the here, yeah.
So how does that, because you talk about soft drinks company and you just look at Coke, who, talking about, their purpose, refreshing the world and making a difference.
Now you mentioned Coke. I was kind.
You said a soft drink.
I was kind and said soft drink company, but let's just talk about Coca-Cola. Let's call them out. Let's call them out. Yeah.
But I suppose what's interesting for me, and it would be good to explore this with you, is the purpose game, as it were, has forced companies to put a societal or environmental ambition within what they're talking about. So whether you agree with it, it's forcing people companies to look at that, and you would hope that they'll start to be held accountable by investors, by employees, by customers. If we give them an exit ramp, so if you're saying actually don't have a purpose, but it's all about how you can help, what you can help consumers to become, I'm not sure what Coke could help consumers to become that has a positive impact. So,
but they can do a lot. They can do a lot. I think the difference is, no doubt about it, becoming a sustainable company. That's a hygiene factor.
Yeah,
that's a hygiene factor. So you ought to do that because else it's your license to operate that's gone. But I don't think that when I set out on my mission when I was 30 and didn't know as much as I do today, I don't think it was, I don't think it's supposed to be that every company needs to be in the business of the betterment of the planet. Yeah. For me, that's foolish, because by the end of the day, brands, it's like if suddenly all our friends were on the climate bandwagon and they all were like, just talking about it continuously. I don't think it's trustworthy. So I think that's my big beef about it, is in fact that, yes, you need to be a sustainable company, but nobody asked Coca-Cola to talk about it.
Yeah, I
didn't. And so I think this rise and this societal pressure, and also increasingly more and more so from investors, and especially institutional investors, have led companies on a simply non-believable crusade. And that's what I don't like. I mean, if I have a niece who's 16, Clara. I refer to her quite a bit in my keynote. She teaches me quite a bit about her view on companies. And what she's saying is that the only thing I've seen from companies, in fact, in my lifetime, is that they are the ones to blame for the climate emergency and for social injustice. Yeah. And all they talk about is how great they are.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just such a big disconnect today. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
And I know I was to blame for it in the beginning with the first book, but now it's just, that was not what I wanted. There's plenty of companies out there that are born purposeful, that have a genuine purpose, but don't stick it on a soft drink. It makes no sense.
Chris, you had your hand up. Do you want to jump in? Was there something you wanted to build on that?
And a lot of research that we've been conducted in has said that most consumers think two interesting things. One is that they think all charity money, they get it back in tax. So they're not really giving to charity, they're just giving it. But it's good. The second one is they don't believe half the environmental stuff they're doing voluntary. They believe they're doing it mainly because they have to do it. So when they do societal stuff, the S in ESG, that they think is more genuine because they didn't have to do that. But how many companies are doing stuff they don't have to do? I mean, IKEA are great, but all they're talking on is banging on about environmentalism, but they're not talking much about the societal stuff.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think another thing that's happening right now, I just wrote an article about it in Ad Age that was out last week, is in fact that even those brands that were purpose pioneers, I think is losing it. I mean, one of the examples I use there is Ben & Jerry's. I mean, back in the days, they were in the first book. I mean, but when you listen to what they're saying today, we want to make the best possible ice cream in the nicest possible way. Best possible ice cream, it's probably pretty far from best in today's standards. I would say it's probably a pretty brand industrialized product. It's not even organic. Nicest, really, also pretty far from the nicest ice cream brand out there. So I think that whole purpose game has just caught up on a lot of these companies. I think Body Shop is another good example. Now they're obviously back with Natura, so I'm the Brazilian group, so I'm a bit excited to see what's going to happen there. But they completely lost it with L'Oreal. And so the question is, in fact, if any of these big FMCG companies can genuinely talk about purpose in a sincere manner without coming across as self-made saints and megalomaniac. I think that's the big question.
What do you think about Unilever? Because recently they've just gone on press saying that is the number one reason people want to go and work at Unilever is because of their fantastic sustainability record. And I think it sounded like a load of greenwash to me.
I think one of the things I point out in the book is, and I think this counts for myself as well, is that first and foremost, I think it's about self-actualization. Yeah. I love working in the creative industry because I love solving puzzles. I love writing. That's my primary thing. That's what I'm passionate about. But hey, wait a moment. I can actually do that without being an idiot and selling cheeseburgers to people already way too fat. That's like a little added bonus. So I think with some of the companies I talk about transformative brands, is in fact that it's much more aligned with a company like Lego, because those people that work there, the passion, the purpose of Lego is so much aligned with the people who work inside that company. And I got to say that I can sort of feel the same thing with people working at Nike, for example, or Apple. They have this. It just runs to the culture. Yeah. Whereas, honestly, with Unilever, some of them might. But I mean, again, take Ben & Jerry's. I think a lot of the stuff they do is in the foundation side of the business, right? I think most of the people I meet, if I go out and I meet the marketing director in Denmark, for that sake, I mean, most of the thing they talk about is what everybody else is talking about. Let's push some ice cream. Yeah. It's ice cream season. Let's get some... So for me, I'm what I'm really curious about is obviously the authenticity behind it, and so I think that the doing part is also becoming extremely dangerous right now, because where does that stop? I mean, just the other day on Black Friday, Lush actually pulled out of social media because they felt that, hey, wait a moment, it's hurting our users. So we'll only come back when it's not hurting our users, which is obviously for them to decide when that happens. But probably what will happen is that it'll probably hurt them before it hurts its users. Because I can't really see how you can run a company without being on social media today, to be honest, especially not in that industry. So is that just too much of an overpromise? Is that going too far? Is that sustainable for the business in an economic sense? I'm not sure.
And I suppose that's you talk about this transformative brands and articulating who they can help people become. And I suppose it's like any marketing proposition. The tighter that is and the clearer that is, the more it enables your activation to be true to what you're doing rather than being unsustainable from a brand point of view. So who, in your view, you talked about Lego. Are there other people you think who you're either working with or you admire who are doing that transformative brands and really clear about who they help people to become in a positive way for society or climate challenge?
Yeah, and I can see Michelle also got her hand up. I think what I did for the book and what I keep doing on a continuous basis is to kind of find and try to understand some of those companies. And I think there's a lot of different ones. For example, one that I really liked interviewing was Marcelo from a company called Respect Your Universe, which is a sports retailer. And the thing he said was, most other sports brands are about athleticism. It's about being the best. It's about winning. It's about all that stuff. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to create a universe that was for everyone. So no matter what your goals were in life or in sport, they were there for you. And he came with quite an inclusive I mean, the whole brand is about inclusivity. I mean, the staff that works there, the sentiment, everything is just about inclusivity. This is for everyone. And I think for me, that was tremendously inspiring in the sense that he got so many letters from customers that said, you know, that they always felt left out because they didn't want to go into Nike because they didn't feel comfortable about the sort of experience, and they didn't, you know, all that stuff. And so for me, I feel that he found something that sort of have a real true insight into a lot of people and their lives, and, you know, how they see themselves and what they want to achieve. And so for me, I want to build purpose that's life-centric, that deals with some of those frustrations I had 3 years ago when I was sitting in Malaga and realizing that, damn, I'm bad at creating change in my own life. I think those were the sort of transformations that I wanted brands to support.
Yeah.
And yes, is that sort of maybe like a circle back in some instances to brands that have prospered like Apple and Nike, and yes, it is. But I think the movement just went too far.
Yeah. Michelle, did you want to come in with a...
It was really just to ask, you know, Thomas and anybody else really, this talking about Lush, going back to what Lush have done. And because I do think it's, you know, the fact that they started out as this, I mean, they don't even like to call themselves an ethical business, because their view is that their business, that's how business should be. You know, we should all be considered about planets and profits. So they're clearly having a little, not a dig at B Corp, but, you know, business should be like that. You shouldn't have to have a label to operate that way. And, you know, their CEO founder came out and said he'd spent all these years trying to keep harmful products out of components out of their products. And here they were now with a huge audience and a growing dependence on social media, and they were really concerned about the mental health and the compelling research that has been done around mental health. So then coming out and saying and making this stand, and they consciously said, you know, it's going to hit them just in the UK in about £10 million. You know, they've said that over a 12-month period, we know we're going to take the hit, but we're willing to take the hit for what we stand for. Now, for somebody like me and my kids, that's like, wow, these people aren't just talking about it, they've done it. And I know it even to their own commercial detriment. Now, I don't know how, you know, sustainable that will be. And I know that there are other ad platforms and other ways that they are going to be able to get to these consumers. But from my perspective, I felt that was not only courageous, but actually pretty smart at a time when people are really looking for brands to take a stand. So I'm not as. But
are people looking for that? That's the question. Well, I mean, I keep hearing this.
The data tells us they are.
Yeah. You know, you get data as you ask people. I think honestly that potentially it's a major trap. It's a major trap, because where does it start? Honestly, where does that rhetoric start? Where does that lead us to? If we're supposed to have businesses that are competing on doing things that are value based, maybe good. In the business's own view, it's good. Take Patagonia. They did this little thing with Vote the Assholes Out in the US, which for me is still one of the most disgusting ads I've seen in a long time. Because it goes up against everything I was born with, believing that everyone has a right to have an opinion. We live in a democratic society, and having a company selling T-shirts on the back of a political statement, I think is actually disgusting. And I think people can see through it, because I know how. I would love to believe that how Lush arrived at that conclusion. We all work in marketing. I'm pretty sure how they arrived at that was they did the issues bingo, right? They look at what are people caring about right now? Okay, what can we piggyback on? Oh yes, we found it. Yes, everybody is talking about how bad social media is. Let's let's take that one for Black Friday to create some conversation so we live up to our marketing goals. And that's fine. It's just...
Do you think it's... I'm not sure.
100% sure.
Sure, Thomas.
I suppose that it comes back to that whole thing, and Chris mentioned about companies giving to charity, or celebrities giving to charity. If they're giving to charity a bit to make themselves feel good, but actually the end point is a positive impact, the challenge would be, does it matter what their motivation is?
I agree. For me, it doesn't matter. It's fine. It's commercial, but I just don't think that I don't think it's healthy right now, the environment that we're in with all these purposeful companies.
Yeah.
And right now they feel that they can't. In the beginning, it was very easy to differentiate yourself. Let's take diversity. In the beginning, you had Dove, you have very few brands. It was easy. You didn't have to do a lot. Today, you really have to go quite far to become or even have the label of being a sustainable or a diverse company. And so for me, I think a lot of those companies are sort of trying to chase a rainbow to seem nice, but they'll never catch it, because most of those brands will have other challenger brands that are faster moving, that are way more sustainable than a lot of the brands that most of us work for.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah. Picky, there's a couple of comments in the chat, and that picks up on the startups versus big brands, and also talking about younger generation versus older generation. And it definitely feels there's a bit of a tipping point here, whether that's the life cycle of consumers or of brands, because you've got the startups who are truly purposeful led, the big brands are learning from them, and then you've got the older generation where they potentially are still buying into purpose, but it's the credibility. You talk about your niece, it's that younger generation that are really challenging it. So it's, at what time does that tip, or can both exist at the same time to be credible, along that generational change?
I think that was what I tried to. I think that was what I tried to set out in the book, and try and refocus, because I think if it's about doing, I think a brand is much more than just that. Because there's a lot of brands out there that are doing a hell of a lot. Lush is actually doing a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
But the problem is, do people generally see that, and how does that compare to others? Do we get confused? Take IKEA as an example. It's absolutely ridiculous that a brand that is doing fast furniture can be perceived as sustainable, but that's that's down to the fact that they've just been very good at communicating it, right? They've been very good at involving all of us in that journey, and they've done some amazing stuff around that. But I think for me, to keep sane, I sometimes, divide those two things and say one thing is sustainable practices of that company, and the other thing is sort of the manifest of the brand or the purpose, because else I just sometimes lose it, because one, it's and I think that the problem is that not every brand should necessarily be for the betterment of society, and that's the problem right now, that they are.
And that's an interesting one, actually, because Martin's just talked about Patagonia, and I know that's Patagonia is one that you talk about in your book about, is the purpose, is their purpose truly credible? So, is that a company, a clothing company that you think should have a sustainable purpose? I know the answer, but I think it'd be useful, interesting to get what your views on that.
No, honestly, I just tease Patagonia because it's much more fun to tease the big kids in the schoolyard, right? The ones that always getting accolade for what they're doing. I think that it's because I'm a writer. When I listen to what they're writing, or we're in the purpose, or we're in the business to save our home planet, I think that's pretty megalomaniac and pretty crazy, to be honest. And I think that sort of puts themselves up there, high up on the purpose and the hero, with the purpose pedestal and potentially a hero trap.
Yeah.
Do they deliver on it? Yes, they do in a lot of aspects. Can they keep doing it? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I think the danger I put forward with Patagonia is just saying that it's dangerous to copy that. So, and I think that's what I started doing myself a decade ago in my career. I looked at Patagonia and I said, yeah, exactly. That's a value-based, purposeful company. That's exactly what I should advise other companies to do.
Yeah.
But very few companies are Patagonia, have a passionate founder who's taken some bold statements and, you know.
One of the other things that would be useful just to get your view on, Thomas, I know you talk about it in the book, is the sort of importance of nudging the masses. So, you know, the younger generation or the people that are eco-focused, it's, and I always talk about sort of Shirley from Watford. It's nothing against anyone called Shirley or Watford, but just that, you know, kind of somebody who is not that motivated, they're not a hipster in Shoreditch who is living this all the time. Nudging those people who make the majority of the population. And I know you talk about that importance of getting them to change behaviour. So how is that, and that's something that we as marketeers need to look at. How do we get those nudges of the behaviours that people aren't asking for it? It's getting people to see things in a different way. And how do you think brands can start to do that?
I think for me the key thing was in fact the change of perspective away from being a sort of being so self-indulgent about your own value and your own perspective of the world, and actually trying to kind of change that perspective towards the sort of the question, who can help people become? And it's so interesting. A very good example of that is Dave Hagens, who a young designer out of Holland who first created phone blocks, which sort of inspired Fairphone, and then he created a project called Precious Plastics. And I think one thing that was so fascinating talking to him about was that he said, you know, I'm really not a you know leader. I'm not a, you know, I'm sort of like a vehicle for people who are tired of whatever reason of plastics. I'm not going to tell them X, Y, Z. And so there's all these different precious plastics communities around the world. And he said that one thing that he felt was incredibly important was that people themselves could define what was that thing that they as a group were, you know, passionate about. And I thought for me that was sort of interesting that, you know, yes, within a certain framework, let's enable, let's help, maybe we can even take MarketingKind as an example, right? I mean, MarketingKind is, you know, a vehicle for all of us who are passionate about having these conversations, but being part of MarketingKind doesn't mean that we have to adopt one certain principle of what that movement is. And so for me, that is what, in essence, inspired me from a lot of those conversations with transformative brands, that it wasn't about signing up for one truth, but it was about finding the truth within ourselves. And one of the examples I use in the keynote is a Danish company called Årstiden Seasons, which was actually when one of the questions I asked, and maybe we used this in the workshop, I can't remember, but one of the questions I asked myself very early on this journey was, what brand lead organization have created positive change in my life? Because I thought with all this purpose nonsense out there's got to be a lot, right? But there wasn't. But one of the ones who had was this Årstiden Seasons, who deliver like a box of farm fresh produce to my doorstep. It's from community farms. And when I interviewed their CEO, he talked about that he didn't want to go on a sort of crusade telling people what they should think and what they should eat and all that stuff, but he really wanted people to find that within themselves. And then the sort of transformative promise there is a promise of earth connection, this thing that I have to discover for myself, this idea that when I'm harvesting the beetroot and I see the red color in my hands, I get, oh, you know, that I never, as a city person, I haven't seen that before. And so that's the magic, I think. In fact, that's the magic that we need to change that perspective and truly enable and give everyone a microphone. And I think it really suits with what, at least that was what the survey we dived into for the book, it really suits what the young generation and the way they view companies, from saying, screw it, I actually don't believe Ben & Jerry's or Patagonia for that sake, but I believe in myself as the agent of change. Yeah. I would love to encourage that more.
Yeah, no, absolutely.